the issue and the role of this body. Given the consistency of this position across U.S. administrations, one would think that it would be a routine vote for the U.S. to allow the passage of a resolution with the elements in this one, reaffirming the longstanding U.S. position on settlements, condemning violence and incitement, and calling for the parties to start taking constructive steps to reverse current trends on the ground. These are familiar, well-articulated components of U.S. policy. But in reality, this vote for us was not straightforward because of where it is taking place at the United Nations. For the simple truth is that for as long as Israel has been a member of this institution, Israel has been treated differently from other nations at the United Nations. And not only in decades past, such as the infamous resolution that the General Assembly adopted in 1975 with the support of the majority of member states, officially determining that Zionism is a form of racism, but also in 2016, this year. One need only look at the 18 resolutions against Israel adopted during the UN General Assembly in September, or the 12 Israel-specific resolutions adopted this year in the Human Rights Council, more than those focused on Syria, North Korea, Iran, and South Sudan put together, to see that in 2016, Israel continues to be treated differently from other member states. Like U.S. administrations before it, the Obama administration has worked tirelessly to fight for Israel's right simply to be treated just like any other country. From advocating for Israel to finally be granted membership to a UN regional body, something no other UN member state had been denied, to fighting to ensure that Israeli NGOs are not denied UN accreditation simply because they are Israeli, to getting Yom Kippur finally recognized as a UN holiday, to pressing this council to break its indefensible silence in response to terrorist attacks on Israelis. As the United States has said repeatedly, such unequal treatment not only hurts Israel, it undermines the legitimacy of the United Nations itself. The practice of treating Israel differently at the UN matters for votes like this one. For even if one believes that the resolution proposed today is justified, or even more necessitated by events on the ground, one cannot completely separate the vote from the venue. And member states that say they are for the two-state solution must ask themselves some difficult questions. For those states that are quick to promote resolutions condemning Israel, but refuse to recognize when innocent Israelis are the victims of terrorism, what steps will you take to stop treating Israel differently? For those states that passionately denounce the closures of crossings in Gaza as exacerbating the humanitarian situation, but say nothing of the resources diverted from helping Gaza's residents to dig tunnels into Israeli territory so that terrorists can attack Israelis in their homes, what will you do to end the double standard that undermines the legitimacy of this institution? Member states should also ask themselves about the double standards when it comes to this council taking action. Just this morning, we came together as a council and we were unable to muster the will to act to stop the flow of weapons going to killers in South Sudan who are perpetrating mass atrocities that the UN has said could lead to genocide. We couldn't come together just to stem the flow of arms. Earlier this month, this council could not muster the will to adopt the simplest of resolutions, calling for a 7-day pause in the savage bombardment of innocent civilians, hospitals, and schools in Aleppo. Yet, when a resolution on Israel comes before this council, members suddenly summon the will to act. It is because this forum too often continues to be biased against Israel, because there are important issues that are not sufficiently addressed in this resolution, and because the United States does not agree with every word in this text, that the United States did not vote in favor of the resolution. But it is because this resolution reflects the facts on the ground and is consistent with U.S. policy across Republican and Democratic administrations throughout the history of the State of Israel that the United States did not veto it. The United States has consistently said we would block any resolution that we thought would undermine Israel's security or seek to impose a resolution to the conflict. We would not have let this resolution pass had it not also addressed counterproductive actions by the Palestinians, such as terrorism and incitement to violence, which we've repeatedly condemned and repeatedly raised with the Palestinian leadership, and which, of course, must be stopped. Unlike some on the UN Security Council, we do not believe that outside parties can impose a solution that has not been negotiated by the two parties, nor can we unilaterally recognize a future Palestinian state. But it is precisely our commitment to Israel's security that makes the United States believe that we cannot stand in the way of this resolution as we seek to preserve a chance of attaining our long-standing objective: two states living side by side in peace and security. Let me briefly explain why. The settlement problem has gotten so much worse that it is now putting at risk the very viability of that two-state solution. The number of settlers in the roughly 150 authorized Israeli settlements east of the 1967 lines has increased dramatically. Since the 1993 signing of the Oslo Accords, which launched efforts that made a comprehensive and lasting peace possible, the number of settlers has increased by 355,000. The total settler population in the West Bank, East, and Jerusalem now exceeds 590,000. Nearly 90,000 settlers are living east of the separation barrier that was created by Israel itself. And just since July 2016, when the Middle East Quartet issued a report highlighting international concern about a systematic process of land seizures, settlement expansions, and legalizations, Israel has advanced plans for more than 2,600 new settlement units. Yet rather than dismantling these and other settler outposts, which are illegal even under Israeli law, now there is new legislation advancing in the Israeli Knesset that would legalize most of the outposts, a factor that propelled the decision by this resolution sponsors to bring it before the Council. The Israeli Prime Minister recently described his government as, quote, more committed to settlements than any in Israel's history, end quote. And one of his leading coalition partners recently declared that, quote, the era of the two-state solution is over, end quote. At the same time, the Prime Minister has said that he is still committed to pursuing a two-state solution. But these statements are irreconcilable. One cannot simultaneously champion expanding Israeli settlements and champion a viable two-state solution that would end the conflict. One has to make a choice between settlements and separation. In 2011, the United States vetoed a resolution that focused exclusively on settlements, as if settlements were the only factor harming the prospects of a two-state solution. The circumstances have changed dramatically. Since 2011, settlement growth has only accelerated. Since 2011, multiple efforts to pursue peace through negotiations have failed. And since 2011, President Obama and Secretary Kerry have repeatedly warned, publicly and privately, that the absence of progress toward peace and continued settlement expansion was going to put the two-state solution at risk and threaten Israel's stated objective to remain both a Jewish state and a democracy. Moreover, unlike in 2011, this resolution condemns violence, terrorism, and incitement, which also poses an extremely grave risk to the two-state solution. This resolution reflects trends that will permanently destroy the hope of a two-state solution if they continue on their current course. The United States has not taken the step of voting in support of this resolution because the resolution is too narrowly focused on settlements, when we all know, or we all should know, that many other factors contribute significantly to the tensions that perpetuate this conflict. Let us be clear, even if every single settlement were to be dismantled tomorrow, peace still would not be attainable without both sides acknowledging uncomfortable truths and making difficult choices. That is an indisputable fact. Yet it is one that is too often overlooked by members of the United Nations and by members of this Council. For Palestinian leaders, that means recognizing the obvious, that in addition to taking innocent lives, the incitement to violence, the glorification of terrorists, and the growth of violent extremism erodes prospects for peace, as this resolution makes crystal clear. The most recent wave of Palestinian violence has seen terrorists commit hundreds of attacks, including driving cars into crowds of innocent civilians and stabbing mothers in front of their children. Yet rather than condemn these attacks, Hamas, other radical factions, and even certain members of Fatah have held up the terrorists as heroes and used social media to incite others to follow in their murderous footsteps. And while President Abbas and his party's leaders have made clear their opposition to violence, terrorism, and extremism, they have too often failed to condemn specific attacks or condemn the praise heaped upon the perpetrators. Our vote today does not in any way diminish the United States' steadfast and unparalleled commitment to the security of Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. We would not have let this resolution pass had it not also addressed counterproductive actions by the Palestinians. We have to recognize that Israel faces very serious threats in a very tough neighborhood. Israelis are rightfully concerned about making sure there is not a new terrorist haven next door. President Obama and this administration have shown an unprecedented commitment to Israel's security because that is what we believe in. Our commitment to that security has never wavered, and it never will. Even with a financial crisis and budget deficits, we repeatedly increase funding to support Israel's military. And in September, the Obama administration signed a memorandum of understanding to provide $38 billion in security assistance to Israel over the next 10 years, the largest single pledge of military assistance.
All right, so we've just been listening to the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, outline essentially the why the U.S. was the only UN Security Council member to abstain, even though this resolution has passed, which would deem it illegal for the Israeli government to continue these settlements in disputed territories. So U.S. being the one abstention. Elise Labott is with me. Oren Lieberman is in Jerusalem. And CNN Global Affairs analyst Aaron David Miller is also here for walking through the ramifications of this. But Elise, first to you, was the U.S. abstention, was that a surprise?
It wasn't a surprise, Brooke, because we had known for the last day or so that the Obama administration was planning to do this. Yesterday, that vote was supposed to take place in the afternoon, and we understand President Obama was prepared to let it pass by exercising an abstention or just voting for it in favor of it. And so what happened, you saw this kind of diplomatic flurry yesterday. You had President-elect Trump come out, putting a statement for the U.S. to veto. There was a diplomatic flurry between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Egyptian president, whose country offered that resolution. Then there was a call between Trump and President Sisi. There was a whole, kind of diplomatic scramble to stop this from going ahead. Now, what happened was Egypt took the resolution off the table, and other countries that were interested in putting it through, New Zealand, Malaysia, Senegal, Venezuela, they went forward, they represented the resolution, and that gave the U.S. an opportunity to let it pass. And I have to say, even though we knew that they were planning on doing it, this is not only in defiance and snubbing what the Israelis said, that they were hoping the U.S. would continue its longstanding protection at the UN. This is in defiance of President Obama's own party. You saw the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, come out with a very strong statement urging the U.S. to veto. And so I think it's a very significant move, which the Israelis feel kind of undermine anything that President-elect Trump would do when he came in, that it would kind of tie his hands a little bit if he were to try and negotiate Mideast peace, something he said that he would want to do. But from the U.S. point of view, the settlement issue have really dogged the U.S. in its efforts for peace. They call it an obstacle for peace over the last 8 years. And, of course, you can't neglect that this is a parting shot by President Obama to Prime Minister Netanyahu, with whom he had a rocky relationship at best over the last 8 years.
Yep. Oren Lieberman, have you heard anything from the Prime Minister? Any reaction to this?
Not from the Prime Minister yet, and that may be because it's the Sabbath on this end. There may not be a response until after, but we've already gotten a response from the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon. He says, neither the Security Council nor UNESCO can sever the tie between the people of Israel and the land of Israel. It was to be expected that Israel's greatest ally would act in accordance with the values that we share, and that they would have vetoed this disgraceful resolution. I have no doubt that the new U.S. administration and the incoming UN Secretary General will usher in a new era in terms of the UN's relationship with Israel. That, too, seems to be a bit of a parting shot at the Obama administration. The Ambassador Danon saying that the Israeli administration is looking forward to work with President-elect Trump, who has already said he would move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That is something the Israeli government and Netanyahu's administration was very happy to hear. As Elise mentioned, the Israelis, Danon himself, worked furiously over the last 24 hours or so to see if they could head off this resolution, even taking the unprecedented act of reaching out to the president-elect.
Right.
That, as we have now learned, of course, failed. They weren't able to change that abstention to a veto, and this passed 14 to nothing with that U.S. abstention. Worth pointing out that Egypt, who had pulled this yesterday, still voted in favor of it when it was reintroduced today.
Okay, so Aaron David Miller, hearing both of them and both noting sort of parting shots back and forth between Israel and the U.S., adding in the layer that we know Israel had reached out to Mr. Trump to jump in and denounce this. What do you make of it?
Look, I think the last 2 days may have actually created a situation that public tweets by the president-elect, calls from the Israelis, calls from Trump to President Sisi. It may well have been that the administration had planned to vote yes on this resolution. The last 2 days may have altered that position to an abstention. But by and large, in my judgment, this was inevitable. It was a train that could not be stopped. For 8 years, the Obama administration has fretted, frustrated, paralyzed in the face of what they consider to be massive increase in settlement activity, undermining the prospects for a two-state solution, which I might add is at best comatose, and couldn't even be attained 14 years ago, when we were at Camp David under the Clinton administration, in much more ideal conditions. So I think frustration was mounting. The Obama administration has talked tough about settlements for the last 8 years, has done very little concrete efforts to stop them. I think they warned Mr. Netanyahu that if he continued, the U.S. would not be able, in the face of international pressure, quote unquote, to defend the Israelis. And they wanted to shape, to some degree, the environment going forward. I think Elisa's notion that this was a parting shot at the Israelis, I would argue is right. It was a parting shot in defense of what the Obama administration and Secretary Kerry believed to be the waning hopes of a two-state solution. My concern, however, is that this is simply going to produce the opposite impact of what the administration intended. I can't even imagine that President-elect Trump has even waited to tweet and to disavow and to distance himself personally. And after 4 weeks from today, Brooke,
27 days
4 weeks from today, right? President Trump's policies with respect to settlement activity. That's negative impact number one. He's going to walk away from this, confusing and confounding American allies as to what exactly the U.S. does stand for when it comes to stopping Israeli settlement activity. I think Mr. Netanyahu is going to be under pressure from his right to demonstrate that they are not going to take this sitting down, so to speak. They may accelerate their activities on the ground. And finally, it may well be, and this is what we do not know, is what the Trump administration, putative Trump administration policies on settlement activity will actually be. But the appointment of Mr. Friedman suggests that it's going to be a lot less muscular, to say the least, than the current administration. It's very difficult. Final point. Sorry to drone on.
No, I'm hanging on your every word.
It's very difficult, 5 minutes to midnight, 4 weeks from the inauguration of another president, to basically engage in an action which has not been taken probably since the Bush 41 administration in terms of allowing such a resolution to pass. However balanced, whatever ingredients the administration succeeded in pushing for, in the end, it's very difficult at the 11th hour to do something like this, because the expectation is now for sure that President-elect Trump is going to walk away from this, thereby, in my judgment, having provided both good and bad advice to a half a dozen secretaries of state, walk away from this, which is going to further undermine the credibility and integrity of the United States. So this is a migraine headache for everyone, and I think it basically is not going to end well.
Wow. A lot of unknowns, you point out, Aaron. And let me before I let you all go, just note the known is the response from the most powerful Republican on Capitol Hill, who, by the way, will be working in tandem, of course, with the Trump administration, House Speaker Paul Ryan. And this is what he just said in reaction. "This is absolutely shameful," he writes. "Today's vote is a blow to peace that sets a dangerous precedent for further diplomatic efforts to isolate and demonize Israel. Our unified Republican government will work to reverse the damage done by this administration and rebuild our alliance with Israel." Paul Ryan. Aaron David Miller, Oren Lieberman, Elise Labott, thank you all so much. Coming up here on CNN, we'll take you back to our breaking news. The FBI issuing this new warning about possible ISIS threats right here in the United States, days before Christmas here and around Hanukkah. What to know about churches. A live report on that coming up.